sorry. Let me come back for just a minute. So Cheryl asked me to run the PowerPoint from my computer, so I'm doing that. And I just wanted to start this by asking everybody to think about the word disability and what comes to your mind when you think about that. And if you would take a minute and think about that and write in the chat box, don't send it, just write in the chat box, just a couple words that come to your mind when you think of disability. And don't send it. We're going to have everybody just write in, and then we'll send it all at one time and just see what collection we come up with as a group. Okay? So just think about the word disability. Write some thoughts in the chat box that come to mind, just immediate thoughts. And when I tell you to, we'll send them all at one time and we'll go through them. Okay? Everybody on board?
Well, what is your thoughts?
It could just be the first thing that comes to your mind. Don't censor it. And everybody knows how to get to the chat box? Okay, Barbara, on the bottom of your screen, if you put your cursor on the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a bunch of like little things down there, and one of them is chat. You see the word chat down there? If you click on chat, okay, and then you can type into the message on the bottom here. It says type message here, just type it in, but don't hit return yet, just type it in. Just some thoughts about when you hear the word disability, what do you think? Barbara, did you find it okay? Okay. Everybody set? Well, no, I see Pete typing over there.
Uh-oh, he's writing a novel. I know Pete's writing.
He's one of those two-finger typers, I think.
You got that right. You know everything.
I saw that. You were like the doot, doot, doot.
Yeah. Yeah, with my left hand too. All right, I'm done.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Everybody set? Okay. Go ahead and hit return. Let's see what we got.
Where's return?
It's enter on the keyboard.
It's enter on your keyboard. I'm sorry.
Hey.
My mistake. Okay. All right. So let's just see what we got here. Obstacles to overcome, inconvenient, lacking physical ability that most people have, block, not full ability, different. Okay.
It's all right.
Inabilities to manage moving in the world. Okay, great. So that's great. And oh, David's coming into the room.
Yeah.
I just wanted to note that that's what comes up for us when we're thinking about the word disability. Okay, welcome, David.
Hi, David.
That won't do, Sue.
All righty, so I'm going to go ahead and share Cheryl's presentation, and we'll get started. Cheryl, are you ready?
Yes.
Okie dokie.
I didn't know how to send it. I don't know how to get back on. Or maybe down here.
Press enter, Pete.
Pete, we can still see you and Sue, so just so you know.
Okay.
Can you see can you see the screen, Pete?
Yeah, with the title and
Yeah, okay, great.
Cheryl's name, yes.
Okay, great. All right, Cheryl.
Okay, so go ahead and advance the second slide and we'll get this running. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about disabilities generally and a bunch of different stuff in this series. If you want me to come back later and talk about museum stuff, I'd be happy to, but today this is where we are. So there's a really good set of definitions of disability from the World Health Organization. And disability is an umbrella term covering impairment, activity limitation, and participation restrictions. So we'll go through these items. An impairment is a term I don't care for, but nonetheless it exists in the literature. So impairment is a problem in body function or structure. An activity limitation is a difficulty encountered by an individual in executing a task or action. And this third point is one that we'll mostly talk about today. Participation restriction is a problem experienced by an individual in involvement in life situations. So put those three things together, and disability is a complex phenomenon reflecting an interaction between features of an individual and society. Next slide, please. So, demographics of disability, around 10% of the world's population, or 650 million people, live with a disability. That number of people with disabilities increases with medical advances and as people live longer, so science. And moving from world down to state data, there's an annual disability statistics compendium report, and that's from the census and data that's like that census. Report shows the population of Maryland includes 10.9 people with disabilities. So rounding up, that is 11 out of 100 Marylanders have a disability. This is all disabilities and all demographics. So roughly 11 in 100. So that 10% number holds pretty standard throughout. Next slide, please. So there are some differences between people with and without disabilities that relate to functioning in society. I bring up the employment numbers because that is one that is very striking example of differences that still exist between people with and without disabilities. So go through the numbers. In 2019, before the pandemic, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported the employment rate of people with disabilities as 30.9%. So 3 in 10, 30 and 100 of people with disabilities between 16 and 64 are employed. Contrast that with the ratio for people without disabilities in the same age group as 74.6%. That's 7 in 10 or 70 in 100. So those rates are roughly reverse. We've been stuck at a 30% employment rate or 70% unemployment rate of people with disabilities for years, before and after the ADA and currently. And there's a lot that goes into that. That could be a whole separate presentation, but I bring that up because it really shows economic marginalization and a whole bunch of other things going on. Next slide, please. So, a lot of this is due to different ways of thinking about disability that people have in society. Misconceptions, for example, if you meet with someone in a job application or any other thing, and we'll talk about these, the medical model and the social model. Next slide, please. So the medical model is something that is, you think of in medical diagnoses, doctors, that kind of thing, views disability as a deficiency or an abnormality. And the medical model tries to remedy disability through a medical cure by trying to make the person appear less disabled or more, quote, normal, quote. And I'll say that this medical model, some service professionals hold to that in social services and rehabilitation and some other things that you know, the person with disability has to follow the professionals say so. This is a very negative characteristic of disability. Next, please. So this is contrasted with the social model of disability. In the social model, disability is a characteristic, just as a person's gender, age, or races are different characteristics, and lots of other characteristics that we have. So disability in the social model is a neutral characteristic. People with disabilities experience participation restrictions. That's that World Health Organization definition. The remedy in these cases is a change in interaction between the individual and society. And the social model is very empowering. It gives people with disabilities, this is where a lot of the advocacy and civil rights work comes in this model. Slide, please. Get to it. My screen is frozen. Sorry, I have lost my screen, which is.
That's okay.
Okay, let's hope I'm where I'm expecting to be. Okay. Ableism is where we are next, I think. Is that correct, Laura?
You are right.
Okay, ableism is defined as discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities. This is based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. And this has a lot of consequences. Am I stuck again? Sorry, I'm having technical glitches here.
That's all right. We have time.
So examples of ableism, there are a lot of them. I'm only coming up with some here, and your homework will actually be to find more. And if you can't find more, you are not looking hard enough. But ableism, the first and big one is that you have to have a visible disability to actually be disabled. This leaves out people who have mental illness, people who have cognitive disabilities, people who have any kind of disability that you don't necessarily know about without encountering them on first reference. So that's a big one. Second one, choosing an inaccessible venue for a meeting or event that excludes some participants. Third one, uploading a video without captioning. So people who are deaf don't know what's being said, or audio description, which interposes descriptions, verbal descriptions within pauses in the movie dialogue so that people who are blind don't have a visual description. And this last one is, this happens all the time, talking to a person with a disability like they are a child, talking about them instead of directly to them. This happens a lot if I'm in a group, or speaking for them. Those are just some. There are many more websites that are inaccessible, are examples, all sorts of things. So your homework will be to notice this in the next couple of weeks before we come together again. So one thing about ableism is that it's expressed in language. Everyday language helps perpetuate ableist ideas and values. Everyday language, if we change that, can help us change our thinking. So here's some terms. Crazy refers to people with mental or psychiatric disabilities. Consider instead terms like wild, confusing, unpredictable, impulsive, reckless, fearless, lives on the edge, thrill seeker, risk taker, out of control. Next one, dumb refers to deaf or hard of hearing people, people with speech-related disabilities, or people with linguistic or communication disorders or disabilities. So a number of folks. Consider instead, if metaphor, dense, ignorant, lacks understanding, impulsive, risk taker, uninformed, silly, foolish, or to replace, those are to replace metaphor, or non-speaking, non-verbal, person with a speech impairment, person with a cognitive disability, deaf person, hard of hearing person, to refer to a deaf or disabled person. Next slide. And there's more. There's lots more. Retarded, idiot, or imbecile refers to people with intellectual disabilities. Consider instead uninformed, reckless, impulsive, ignorant, risk-taking, risky, and dangerous. Lame refers to people with physical or mobility disabilities, often used as a metaphor. Consider instead, for metaphors, boring, uninteresting, monotonous, lacks excitement, uncool, out of fashion. And for physically disabled person, person with a mobility impairment, paralyzed person, if referring to a disabled person. And there's more. Next slide, please. Now, here we get, some people know that I have strong thoughts about this. Ableist language in metaphors. Metaphors can use physical characteristics to describe mental failings. So, deaf to, turn a deaf ear to, etc., refers to deaf or hard of hearing people. Consider instead willfully ignorant, deliberately ignoring, turning their back on, had every reason to know, feigned ignorance. Likewise, blind to, turn a blind eye to, or blinded by ignorance, bigotry, etc., referring to people who are blind or have low vision. Consider instead willfully ignorant, deliberately ignoring, turning their back on, overcome by prejudice, had every reason to know, feigned ignorance. Notice they're the same words. English has so many words. There's no reason to use physical characteristics as metaphors in speech. There are so many other choices. So I put that out there for your enlightenment, however that goes. Next slide, please. So you've been noticing that I've been bouncing around a little bit between person first and identity first language. So person first, person with disability is preferred. However, you'll notice that some people with disabilities and advocacy organizations use identity first language, as in blind person, or in our case, National Federation of the Blind. This is reclaiming identity, emphasizing a characteristic, emphasizing a neutral characteristic, and so forth. But follow the style guide for the reference there for National Center on Disability and use person first language unless using a direct quote. And a lot of this that I've copied is a direct quote. And so that's why I've been switching back and forth, but you'll see that a lot. Next slide, please. Okay. So my screen has frozen again. Okay. I have jumped ahead. But we're on Crip Camp, correct? I have to go back.
Yes, you are. Yes, that's where we
Okay.
are.
All right. Now I'm with you. I just went too far.
Okay.
Okay. The work to change society is ongoing, and people with disabilities have been activists to make society more accessible. This disability history is not as well known as other civil rights struggles. In fact, I'm still learning about aspects of it daily. And every time I do research, I find something new. Here's one. In January 2020, there's a movie called Crip Camp that came out. Notice Crip, that's person first language, that's their community term. Anyhow, it premiered at Sundance, and then it was released in March on Netflix. So there's a lot going on in March 2020, so you might have missed it. I did. So quoting from the review, with insight, clarity, humor, and beauty, Crip Camp explores the experience of one group of disabled young people and their journey to activism and adulthood, and in so doing provides an opportunity for all to delve into the rich and complicated history of disability activism, culture, and history. So I missed it, but has anyone else seen Crip Camp?
Anyone see this? Well, I have.
Thoughts?
Yeah, and Nate and I saw it. It's a fabulous film. It's about these young people, like very early 20s, who are disabled, physically disabled, cerebral palsy and other things, who go to this camp and like hold hands for the first time, kiss. I mean, it's just so freeing, and it's such a wonderful film. And Nate, who is involved with disability rights activism in the 80s and 90s, saw people in that film that he recognized that helped pass the ADA.
It's all connected.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
I highly recommend the film. It's
Excellent.
really it's
Nate
just an
Recognize
excellent
people
film.
who helped pass the ADA in that film.
Oh,
Yeah, it's a really, can people hear me okay? Okay. It's a really good film. Really good.
So this disability history is not as well known as other civil rights struggles, as I've said. I didn't know a lot of this. And the connection between Crip Camp and the ADA. So shall we move to the ADA? Okay. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, most people know it. It has a three-part definition of disabilities. We're getting back to definitions, and some of this medical stuff will come up again. Under the ADA, an individual with a disability is a person who has a physical or mental impairment. Again, I hate the term impairment, but it's there. It substantially limits one or more major life activities. Second part, has a record of such an impairment. Third part is regarded as having such an impairment. This definition is based on the Rehabilitation Act, and it reflects very specific types of discrimination experienced with people with disabilities. Again, strike the term impairment. Next slide, please. So I'm going to keep talking about representation and disability and the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial, just because a lot of people that were involved with the ADA were later involved with the campaign to put the wheelchair statue up. And that's one of my recent projects, was doing some document review for them, and I've recently been learning some of that history on that campaign. So the memorial was first dedicated in 1997. It did not include a depiction of FDR's disability. This is kind of in keeping, he kept it pretty low profile in the 30s and 40s when he was president. He did not allow himself to be photographed in a wheelchair, except when he was visiting veterans hospitals and talking to wounded veterans, because a lot of them were coming back from World War II with just horrific wounds. But in other contexts, he was photographed seated in a car, or he'd be standing with braces, and just trying to govern and go about governing. And this is a white privileged guy. I mean, but even then he had to minimize his disability.
Mhm.
So this disability aspect was not represented in the original memorial. So that became something that the National Organization on Disability became aware of, and they led a campaign to include FDR's disability. And it was eventually the campaign joined by over 50 disability organizations. Then a Harris poll in the 90s revealed that 73% of the public supported disability portrayal. And further, 16 of FDR's grandchildren wrote a letter in support of this depiction. And legislation was passed the night before the dedication in 1997 to add the wheelchair statue, to add FDR's disability to the memorial. So the wheelchair statue was eventually added and dedicated on January 10th, 2001. It was an epic battle to get the statue, the entire room in which it stands, funded, designed, and built. This campaign, of course, as I said, was led by people with disabilities. The statue of FDR in a wheelchair was designed by sculptor Robert Graham. And there's a quote in that room from Eleanor Roosevelt referring to the inner strength her husband acquired as a result of polio. So his disability and having to function in life. I will say that as the campaign was going, there were some public protests before the legislation was added to include the wheelchair depiction. The campaign, one of the protest slogans was "Don't hide FDR's source of strength." And if you go online to FDR Memorial Legacy Committee, there's a group that is working to keep all this archival stuff available, and you can go through the letters and the transcripts and the oral history and all the news clips and see all of it. So they have this prologue room now that has FDR in a wheelchair. It has Braille on the wall, but I'm told the Braille on the wall is behind the statue and you can't reach it. It's too high up to be touched. So someday we would like to see that changed. At some point, I will keep working with the committee when they're funded, and we'll work on that. But that's an ongoing example of representation and campaigning. So next slide, please. So I've covered a lot, but I want to finish my presentation with top 10 tips for inclusion. A colleague of mine who is a disability consultant and she works with large organizations put this together. I think that they are useful. Next slide, please. So these first few deal with, with people. First one, treat all people as competent. I can't tell you how many times as a person with a disability, people have not treated me as competent. The second one, ask the person how you can be most helpful. Understand the answer may be, I'm fine, thanks, I don't need anything. But it might be, can you do this? Or can you do that? And respect that. This third one is crucial. Get permission before touching a person or their mobility aids. I can't tell you how many times people have tried to get me to go somewhere by picking up the bottom of my cane and pulling it. And it's like, I need that on the ground to touch the ground so I don't trip over things and fall. And I have to say that to people. Can't tell you how many times I've been grabbed and people can't verbalize. I mean, if you don't know your left and right, don't grab me. But that's just people dealing with people. And I have to say, being shut in with everything being locked down for Corona, I don't miss that aspect of public interaction, but it will come to us again soon. This fourth point, remember that people with disabilities are a cross-section of society and have a range of interests, strengths, and preferences. I may do something one way, someone else who is blind may accomplish the same task a different way. Someone else with a different disability has other tasks to accomplish and other techniques. It's all different. Just because you know me, you don't necessarily know what the next person will do, again, without asking. And organizationally, incorporate people with disabilities in leadership. And go through the last of these tips. Again, my friend works with organizations a lot, so assume that in every group there are people with disabilities. You may not know what they are. They might be invisible, but remember, 11 out of 100, 10% of the population. Include disability explicitly in diversity statements.
Mhm.
Provide communications in at least 2 formats. So examples would be print and Braille. If you have programs, do it in print, do it in Braille. If you have videos and there's something spoken, have it captioned, just something that I think, in my opinion, need to work on, but we'll talk about that next time. Examples like the next point for organizations conduct this accessibility assessment to identify priorities and areas that need to be changed. And the last is contact disability organizations for to learn about appropriate accommodations and relevant cultural concerns. And my colleague had on the back side of that second page of the document that had organizations and contact information. And I would be happy at some point to distribute that contact list and her sheet. So I've covered a lot. I'm up for discussion if you guys are.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. That was wonderful. That was really good. So if you want to unmute yourself, if people have questions, I'm just gonna move over to the couch because Nathan is over here and he's been watching the presentation. So I'm just gonna turn off my video for a second. So does anybody have a question before we go? Or a comment?
I have a question.
Happy.
That was a great presentation.
Thanks.
Very much. Government has moved its vocabulary enormously since during my lifetime in terms of how they speak about disability. How would you rate government verbiage when it comes to this matter in terms of vocabulary?
Well, I don't study it except for when I need to. But yeah, I think they're moving towards person first. I think it's getting better, but again, you still see impaired and other things in the law, and that a lot of it is going to be with us for a long time. But yeah, it's probably not a definitive answer to
Okay.
really have.
Better, but not as good as it should be.
Yeah, but that's
Okay.
government general.
Okay.
I work for the government. I can tell you where it is where I am.
All right,
So,
go ahead.
no, everything is pretty much people with disabilities. That's pretty much because all the EEO stuff that we have to deal with, it all says people with disabilities. I work for Department of Defense for people who may not know, and that's pretty much what everything says. It's people with disabilities.
Yeah. I know in the healthcare world, like HHS, it's always person first language. Like I know a lot of you know that I'm a nurse by profession, and that whole thing of like the diabetic down the hallway, you don't talk like that anymore. It's people with diabetes,
Yeah,
with the disability. So it's this whole person first language is really huge
right.
on the government.
I think where people really need to work is the metaphors. Crazy, blind to, deaf to, blah, 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 blah. I think the metaphors is where, and you notice the repetition of a lot of things. It's like, if you mean ignorant, say ignorant.
Well, yes, and I'm a little concerned about calling people ignorant. It's almost like the despicables claim.
Yeah,
Whether
well,
it was well-intentioned, but maybe had a
Deplorables was the word.
I'm sorry, deplorables. Not
oh, like
despicable.
Clinton back in the day, yeah.
Right,
Well,
right.
Yeah, it's tricky. It is, no question.
I have a question.
I'm sure.
I like to learn new stuff all the time. And I use visual metaphors a lot. So I will read about something that I've never heard of before. And then I'll go, oh wow, I was blind to that dynamic before. Or I might say something like, it's like when I was not open when I saw that before or something.
Yeah,
So
it's changing.
how would I better express that kind of, well, I didn't see that before.
You could say that. I didn't see that. I didn't know that. I've been seeing one organization I work with a lot. They've been saying be mindful of, and just kind of tell people to remember something instead of But yeah, it's definitely changing. But if you mean you didn't know something, it's just say you didn't know something. That's my take on it.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Nate.
Other questions or comments or thoughts about the presentation or?
I just think this is an important for a lot of people just ignore, you know, the non-disabled just don't get into it, you know, and are not aware. And it's so good to have a nice presentation like this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to do it. And, you know, it's good to have Laura to bounce ideas around with. And it's, I mean, we could go into the weeds in any of my slides and make another detailed presentation, really.
Yeah.
I would like to say one more thing.
Sure.
I've been dealing with this disability thing for years and years. And the aspect of it that is most disturbing to me is not my particular physical characteristics that make me unable to walk or talk funny, etc. But it is, as say, for instance, a 40-year-old man standing there and somebody just talking to me like I'm a child that probably can't comprehend what they're saying. And that's kind of what you were referring to yourself.
Do they speak louder?
Yeah. When I first got shot, there was a friend of mine, or someone I knew, visiting me in the hospital, and she was yelling at me, like talking real slow and loud. Whoa, what's wrong with her? You know? And
Yes.
I realized she wasn't sure I could understand or pick it up or whatever. And I think in the interaction, it's like, oh, it makes me angry inside, which I don't like, but it
Yes.
makes me feel like they're not seeing me as who I am.
I get it.
Beth, how do you, I mean, Cheryl, how do you, how do you feel about the disability role-playing kinds of?
Oh my gosh, I really worry about that. I really do, because if you go under blindfolds without proper training, you're going to think that you can't function. However, in structured environments, in training centers, I have taken people under blindfolds, and then you're walking right next to them. You know, you give them a cane, you tell them, you show them how to use it, you stay right next to them, you go slow. Yep, okay, you're tapping a chair in front of you, you want to step around it, and you really give that coaching. That's the only way I would do it. I wouldn't just do it. I know it's popular at retreats and quote unquote team building for one person to blindfold and have the other person, you know, it's a trust thing, and I hate that. If you want, I can find you references about negative aspects of, for example, blindness simulations. They do exist.
Would Cheryl or Beth, would you be willing to do it with some of us at church?
Oh, that's,
Yeah, that would be, that might be good.
we could. That's interesting.
I would be very interested to try that with you, because I
could.
know you both. I know both of you, but I'd be very interested to.
I hadn't thought of it. We can talk later. I don't know.
Yeah.
When we could get back into
Yeah,
the
when,
church,
you know, after
what's
COVID,
going on.
you know, but something to think
Yeah,
about.
we could talk about it.
Sometime in the next 10 years.
God.
Cheryl,
I was fascinated because experience I've had professionally in the last few years, of course, is with doing research into the enslaved persons.
Yeah.
And notice that I didn't say about the slaves.
Yes. You've
There
been doing
is
that too.
language, and we're trying to be very sensitive sensitive about it. I
Mhm.
constantly correct other people's published
Mhm.
language.
Yeah.
But one of our newest ones is we don't refer to those folks that we used to say ran away, quote. We now say freedom seekers.
That makes
In other words,
sense. Yeah.
Took agency.
Runaway.
They
Mhm.
weren't escaping jail. Now, yes, they were leaving a terrible situation.
Right, right. Yeah.
But that it's showing the agency
Mhm. Mhm.
of those people.
Mhm.
So I was very interested in the parallels.
Yeah,
of,
there
that
marginalization is
occurred.
marginalization. It's just expressed differently. But yes, absolutely. Yeah, I noticed your talk the other week, Gregory. You were saying enslaved person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was awkward at first if you spent
Mhm.
decades saying one specific term.
It's like the singular they.
Yeah.
I have a colleague in another organization who that's her pronouns, they, them, and I have to remember it. You know, it's awkward, but I have to get used to it. Yeah. Yeah. And I've got you all speechless.
So I have a comment, if no one minds, just about this whole awareness stuff, because I'm a blind person at work, I got put in charge of our awareness effort, and I was not thrilled about it. They have what they call a disability expo. I was like, oh, are we showing off our disabilities or are we showing what we can do? So when I first got to work in 2012, they were basically having people go under blindfold and do all these things. And by itself, it's not bad if people have the right attitude. But the point is, we're not trying to show people what we can't do or how difficult it is. We're trying to show people what we can do. So what I ended up doing is having people use voice output software like what Cheryl's doing, or a number of other things, try to use a wheelchair and try to get around an obstacle course to, things that people actually have at work. And that's what we ended up doing, because what they did before is that they had people walking with canes with no one helping them. So of course they crashed into stuff. And, that is just not, we want to talk about what people can do. So I ended up basically pretty much running the blind and low vision part of it for a while and trying to teach people that, managers would come up to me who might not have talked to me before, and I had them sit down for 5 minutes and open a Word document, and I turned the monitor around and I wouldn't let them use the mouse, and I just showed them how we use the computer for 5 or 10 minutes. I think that did a lot more good than having them go around in a blindfold.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep. I remember one time, Beth, you showed me, and I've never seen one before. Wait, when you're at church, I can't remember the name of it, Beth. It's an instrument that you had on your lap, and it's a way that you hear the program. Do you know what I'm talking about?
We have Braille displays, so maybe that's what was happening.
Actually
We were
using
reading
one
the.
right now, if you can see it in my video.
Can you hold it up towards your mouth and then we could? Well, yep. There.
Oh.
Yep.
There it
It
is.
was
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like that.
Yeah.
It was the first time I'd ever seen an apparatus like that, and it was like really interesting. And it kind of goes with what you're saying, Beth. It's not what you can't do, but what applications do you use so that you can read, basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's pretty much what we were, because we copy the church services over to those devices, and then you can either hook it to your phone, or I just copied it to it has a SD card and a USB port, so you can copy things to it, so you can read all the hymns and all the words and everything else. So basically, if we don't have that, if we don't work things out, like Kim sends it to us every week, if we don't have that, we can't participate. Things like that matter.
Yeah, exactly.
In this morning's gospel, it was about Jesus healing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think several different kinds of physical things were mentioned, like lame and blind and deaf, etc. When you hear that kind of thing, how do you, from the pulpit, how do you as a person in the pew react to it?
Oh, here they go again.
Oh, boy. Yeah, really? 'Cause we think we're whole people. There's nothing impaired. There's nothing wrong with us. We're fine the way we are.
Yeah, I'm planning to cover this next time in more detail because that is baggage with people and humans and churches being made of imperfect humans. Yes, it's a sore point. Definitely. But we can certainly talk about that more.
Did you hear that, Lucy? I see you trying to hear.
No, I was asking, I didn't. You're right. I don't hear well. And
Sorry, Lucy.
no, it's not your fault.
Ah.
The good ear isn't working as well as it had been, nor is
See,
its hearing aid.
If we were managing to caption our Zoom programs, you could have been reading that whole exchange.
That's right.
So I've been provided the information. So.
Rob is my pair of ears for something.
Yeah.
I would like to say that it's been extremely enriching for me, I'll speak for myself, to have you, Cheryl, and Beth in our church congregation. It's just been wonderful to see you all as wonderful, functioning, great people, and especially Beth as a Red Sox fan, of course.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
she's from Maine originally, so.
Yeah, we share.
I think that's the first day I met you. We talked about that.
Maybe you had your jacket on. That's
I had my jacket on, yeah.
Yeah, my jacket. That's right.
Red Sox Nation.
It actually makes it's good because people, in all seriousness, I've had people stop me at train stations and I'm like, oh no, here they go. It's a blindness thing. Nope, Red Sox. It's like,
Red
okay,
Sox
that's
fan.
fine. I had one guy who said he didn't want to give me directions because he was a Yankees fan
That
at
was
Union
funny.
Station.
He gave us directions.
He did
but
help. He was
teased her.
just joking around with me,
It was
which
funny.
was fine.
I love that. That's great.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
What a great forum. And thanks,
Thanks.
Laura, for doing this. This is
Yeah,
fun.
it was definitely helpful to
Yep.
have someone help keep me out of the weeds.
So next time, Cheryl, do you want to talk a little bit about next time?
We don't have it completely planned out, but this week was disability stuff and hey, ableism exists and ableist languages exist. It's a thing that permeates everywhere like racism and sexism. Next time we want to talk about church stuff more in detail, but Laura and I haven't hashed out all of those details yet. I have some places I want to take it, probably a little less definitional, maybe a little bit more experiential in personal experience, but yeah, that's where we're going.
Okay.
Very good.
Laura, I think it would be helpful to our general discussion if we spent some time next time with Cheryl and Beth. What can we do in the church?
Okay,
Physically.
well, I've been thinking of things, so
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
can
If
cover
we could carve out a little piece of that time, because we're in the thick of this with the elevator, but there are other pieces of quote accessibility,
right.
which would be very, very helpful for you to define for us. And
Yeah, and messaging and all sorts of things.
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Right.
Just
Thank you, Lee. That's great. Are there other things that people want to hear about or to talk about accessibility at the church 2 weeks from now? Because you all know we got this capital campaign that's starting.
We have a capital campaign started.
Anybody else? Okay. All righty.
Thank you.
bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl and Beth.
You're welcome.
Clap, 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 clap,
I can hear you.
Oh, yeah.
clap.
Hi, everyone. Have a good day.
You
Take
too.
care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.